Something similar to this can be made from second-hand stuff that you might just have sitting around the house. So I would like to show you how I made a glass hummingbird feeder in just 5 easy steps. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3, Step 4, and finally, Step 5. Oh, you'd like me to go into a little more detail on step number 5. Alright, I will. Just be sure that at least 24 hours has elapsed since you've finished step number 4. There is a certain degree of variation between bottles, so you might want to try different ones until you get a good fit. This one doesn't fit, this one does. But what is also an option is to use an abrasive stone like this one, which is made for glass, to knock this lip down. You might get away with an old grinding stone, but this is definitely the better alternative. Nothing fancy this time, just a piece of dowel with some duct tape on it and a piece of foam rubber to help reduce friction. That worked out great. Next up, drilling holes in glass. Drilling glass takes patience. If you're in a hurry and you try to apply pressure, you will fail. In fact, try not to think of it as drilling at all. Instead, think of it like sanding or grinding your way through the glass. I'm using a 1/8 inch glass and tile bit, similar to this one. And what I've done to it here is I've wrapped it with a strip of craft felt. And that acts as a bumper to keep the drill chuck from breaking my glass. In order to make the little flowers, you will need a coffee stir and a straw. Red and white are widely available, and red is preferable. Notice that a coffee stir fits perfectly into our bottle, and I'll get to that in a moment, but I would also like to mention that in order to get a nice fit, our top bottle should have 3 O-rings on it. And this will help it seat perfectly into the lower bottle. Take note that the bottle has 6 leaf patterns in it, and that worked out nicely because I put a hole at the tip of every other leaf, and that gives the holes exactly a 120-degree offset from one another. The white liquid is just water with a splash of milk in it for clarity on camera. I would also like you to note that the O-rings are not to keep the liquid sealed within these containers. It's just to keep one bottle from rattling around on the other. Ideally, we want our liquid level to be about 1/8 of an inch beneath our holes. And there are a few ways that we can go about adjusting this. One way is to just raise or lower the upper bottle until we get exactly what we want. Another way is to find that perfect spot by pressing the upper bottle all the way in and then cutting the upper bottle's lip on a wet saw to the appropriate height. Right now I have them pressed in nice and firm, and take notice of how deep my upper bottle goes into the lower bottle and how that is relative to the hole. You can tell that my upper bottle is about 1/4 inch long, so benefit from my mistake, and when you drill your holes, make sure that you put the bottles together first and find out how deep the upper bottle goes in, and then just drill your hole so that it's about 1/8 inch higher than the upper bottle is deep. Hope that makes sense. I'll move on to the copper work in just a moment, but first let's talk about ants. Ants are tiny and tenacious creatures that love sugar water, especially it seems when it's been mixed to a 4-to-1 ratio. So we need to make a break in the continuity somewhere, so that ants can't come down this and get to the sugar water. And the best way that I found to do that uses a piece of wire and any old red plastic lid. My early attempts at solving the ant problem involved epoxy putty, and then I would silicone over top. And this was rugged, but largely unnecessary. I have since streamlined the process. I just put a dab of hot glue there, and this is much smaller and easier to deal with, and it works just as well. Before you can insert your wire into the plastic, you have to make a hole, and a great way to do that is to use a sharp needle tool like this. Then when you insert the wire, it's pretty much self-sealing. Then the hot glue dab becomes almost a redundancy. Despite being small and simple, this design is very efficient and quite rigid. And by the way, I think the lid is from some bacon bits. To start the copper, I'm going to make an S-hook, a keychain sort of thing, and 3 copper chains that have 38 links each. If you have questions about making copper chain, they're likely answered in my video about it. I'll put links, well, you know where to find the links. Next up are these 3 support arms, and in this version I went around the glass and twisted it back on itself, exactly like you would with a twisty tie. This time around I'm going to change that to stop it from doing this. I started by cutting 3 pieces of wiring to about 15 inches and then bending those around the neck of the bottle. When they're done, they should be around 6.5 inches from end to end. This time, rather than bending each one to itself, I'm going to bend each one to its neighbor. And hopefully that will make it nice and rigid. As I bend these, I'm going to be paying careful attention to the leaf pattern so I can try to preserve my 120-degree angle as best as I can. Keeping it straight is easier than it looks, I promise. We want to make about 1 3/8 inches worth of the braid. Once we get it that long, we're going to put a loop on it. If you want to tighten this at any time, you can grab a hold of it with pliers and twist it, but you have to be careful because if you over tighten it, while it looks nice, it will crack the glass, and we still want it to expand and contract and be able to gently rotate. Next we use a piece of metal to make eyes that the chain can attach to. Now I just bend each eye vertically so that they can accept the chain. Our next item are these tiny little compound flowers. The idea is to kind of mimic a cardinal flower, which is a hummingbird's natural food. And they're so small because a hummingbird's bill is only about 2 centimeters long. If you make 5 cuts in the end of the drinking straw, and then splay the pieces out, it approximates petals nicely. I've used a piece of masking tape to act as a depth set, just for consistency. Now, as for getting the petals all the same size, it takes trial and error, but luckily straw is really inexpensive. To shape the petals, you just make a long cut, followed by a short cut. We also want to give them a mild curl, just to make them a little more realistic looking. The white part of the flower is done in exactly the same way, except it's just a little bit longer. And that way, when it's inserted into the glass, it will hold the red part in. An optional finishing touch is to add some bright red color. Cleanliness is very important with hummingbird feeders. So you should note that these glass marbles are impervious to bacterial growth. If you ever see any little black spots or other signs of microorganisms, you should clean your feeder immediately. And now, we just patiently wait for hummingbirds to arrive. I hope that you found something in this video helpful, and if you did, try joining me on another project. Until next time.